Sorry I got cut off there, but as I was saying, if you are respecting the tooth of your paper, and I'm zooming in again, it means you are building up the graphite of your pencil shading really gradually, and you're still seeing the texture of the shading underneath. What I was just showing is that if you press really, really hard, right, and I create this really dark mark, it might look like that's really great black shading from this angle, but if the light hits it at a certain angle, you can see that I pressed so hard that my pencil graphite got really shiny. And so then when the light hits it, rather than looking black, it actually looks white, which is the opposite of what you want it to look like in your drawing if you're drawing a dark area. So that's one reason that you don't want to crush the tooth. And then another reason is that if you're drawing really hard, you're pressing really hard, and you do a hard line like this, if I pressed hard enough to crush the tooth, then when I go back and try to erase, my line will still be there pretty obviously. Whereas if I draw the same line but I don't press hard enough to crush the tooth, I pressed a lot lighter that time, then when I go back and erase, it might not erase perfectly, but it's going to erase so much better than your first one, so you can see that difference. And you could probably draw, if you know, what I recommend is drawing really lightly at first, so that then when you erase it, you can't see it at all. So that's the difference in respecting the tooth and how hard you're drawing and shading. The next rule, and we actually kind of just talked about this one, is use light to medium pressure and build up the graphite gradually. A very important rule is never smudge with your finger. Never smudge with your finger. And by that I mean doing some shading and then going in and smudging like this. Now the reason for that is that our fingers have natural oils on them, and once you get that oil on the paper, it'll start rubbing off onto it, and it'll make your shading over time look sort of blotchy. It will not look as refined. There are tools, I don't have one with me right this second, but that are called styluses, and later on we'll be learning how to use those to improve our shading. But it's a really great habit to get so good at shading that you don't have to go back and blend with anything, that your shading looks so beautifully smooth the first time that there's no reason to smudge it. That's my goal for you. One thing you may want to try, you don't need to write this down, but if you tend to hold your pencil really flat while shading, that does not work well. If you hold it really straight up and down, that does not work well. You want to hold it at a 45-degree angle. So that would be an angle kind of like that. This is what you're going for if that's like your pencil, right? You don't want to do an angle like this that's like really flat. And you don't want to do almost straight up and down. So this is yes, no, no. All right, that's going to help you do the best shading. And it can also sometimes help to hold your pencil a little bit away from the tip. So what I'll often do is when I'm drawing, I'm holding it really close, but when I'm shading, I bring my hand a little bit further back, and that helps me make those tiny oval movements a little bit better. So now what you're going to do is we're going to use those shading tips to actually start shading in your value scale. So we can label it first. These are going to be your lightest two boxes. So this is going to be with your 2H, both of these. These are going to be your medium boxes. So these are going to be with your 2B. And these are going to be your darkest boxes. So these are going to be with your 6B. So I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate a couple of these boxes. With my 2H, I'm just going to start shading as, and let me see if I can zoom in a little more here actually. Okay, so I'm going to start shading as lightly as I possibly can. Now the lighter you can get your first box, that's really important because it gives you more room to go darker, 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 darker. If you start this and it's already medium, it's gonna be really hard to have enough time to really get, to shade all the boxes before they start getting so dark that you can't tell the difference between them. So just trust me, to really see how light you can possibly go. It's like your pencil is barely grazing the tooth of the paper. So that's the idea there. As tiny, tiny little pencil motions as you can do. I'm not going to shade the entire square right now, but make sure you're really taking your time when you do this. Then with your next one, I'm going to continue using my 2H, but this time I'm going to press a little bit harder. That I'm still trying to stay pretty darn light because I have a long way to go before I get to my darkest shading. So you would shade that entire square in with that second lightest shade. And remember, the idea is you don't want to see any of your shading marks. You want your shading to be so smooth and even that it just looks like one smooth value all the way across. Okay? Then I'm going to move on. I'm going to switch now to my 2B pencil. And I might have to start pressing quite a bit lighter now to try to only make it progress a little bit darker than what I had before. So you're trying to figure out how dark or how hard or how soft you need to press to get the shade that you want, the lightness or the darkness of value that you want. So how lightly can I press to try to get the lightest possible value? And then I would move on. Again, you're going to shade the whole box, but I'd move on to this one. And you get the idea. You would keep going. You're going to use your 6B pencil to do the last two boxes. And when you are done with that, you are done with these notes. Nice job.